So we got our first components. Let's now work on the styling. Now there are some base styles which I want to set application wide. So for that I'll go to app.view, and there below the script tag I'll add the style tag without scoped though, just style like this. So the styles in here are applied globally to the entire application. And as a side note, the structure of having template first, script section, and styling last is the typical structure you want to use in those .view files, just in case you were wondering. Now attached you find an app CSS file which contains some styles you should copy between these style tags. I'm importing some Google fonts here, and then I'm just setting some general application-wide styles, for example applying the imported font as the default font. If you save that and reload, we have a different font. Now I also want to change the styling of the learning resource, and therefore here I will also add styling, but now with the scoped attribute, because the styles here should be exclusive to this component. Now you also find a learning resource.css file attached, and as you might be guessing, that contains the styles you should copy between these style tags. And I'm giving you these styles for copy and pasting because it's not a CSS course. I know many students are bored if we write CSS code here, so here are the styles, you can just copy them in. And you should now see this on the screen. Now, obviously, that's not the final style, but it looks a bit better at least. To get closer to the final styling, I'll add another component next to the learning resource component. That will be a component which should actually contain this unordered list and then also this loop here. And I'm creating a separate component for that, not because this would be so much markup, but because I essentially don't want to have it in my root app.view file. I really just want to have a minimal template in there and just have the application-wide styles in here. So I don't want to start styling an unordered list here in app.view when we might be using unordered lists in other components as well, since I don't want to use scoped here. So therefore, I'll add a brand new component and I'll name it stored resources.view, add a template, and basically just copy the template from the app.view file, or cut it, into that template of the stored resources.view file. Now, of course, we're now missing the stored resources here, which we need for v4. The stored resources are still part of the data option of our app, and therefore not available like this in the stored resources. Well, you of course know how we can make them available here. We can add props here and let Vue know that we need some data from outside. And here I want to get my resources. Again, this name is up to you, so that here I can loop through my resources. And resources should now be those stored resources. So in app view, I'll actually remove the existing import which I had in here and instead import the stored resources from /components learning resources stored resources.view and register the stored resources here in components instead of learning resources, and then use stored-resources here in my app.view file template and pass the stored resources I have here in my data through props to the stored resources component. So there I want to bind the resources prop, which is the prop I added in there, and I will pass the stored resources key here. So the stored resources array I have in my data option, that's passed as a value through the resources prop to the stored resources component. And now inside of the stored resources component, we're using the learning resource component, so I want to import and register it there. And I'm working with local components thus far, because at the moment I only have components that I need in specific areas or in specific parts of the app. So therefore here I'll import my learning resource from /learningResource.view. It's in the same folder as the stored resource.view file, so we just need this import path. And then here I'll add components and register learning resource as a local resource in this stored resources component. Now with that, it looks like before, but now I got a brand new component, the stored resources component. And I added this because now here I can add scoped styling to the stored resources and add component-specific styling that takes care of this unordered list without affecting unordered lists in other parts of the app, which we might have. Of course, there would have been alternatives to this solution as well. We could have worked with CSS classes, for example, but I want to keep my app.view file lean, as I mentioned. And by adding this extra component, I'm achieving this. Now, as I also mentioned before in the course, things like that also come down to personal preference, of course. I'm just teaching you one possible approach of doing that. There is no single right or wrong approach. With that, however, you can now download the attached stored resources CSS file and copy the style you find in there, this unordered list style, between the style tags of your stored resources.view file. And if you do that, you should now see a slightly changed look here. The dots in front of the list items are gone. Now it's still not the final look, but it's one step closer. With that, we're outputting some dummy resources. As a next step, I want to work on a header, which I want to have in this application, and I want to add a card look to my resources here. And as before, you can definitely try this on your own, come up with solutions for that, for adding a header and a card look, and we'll do it together in the next lecture.